Wonderful. Welcome, everyone. My name is Violetta Ilkio. I am one of the Community Engagement Facilitation team members on working with the city and Councillor's Office and the community regarding 76 Church Street, the temporary shelter. This is a community information session. You can join by telephone or online, and we are going to get rolling right now. Today, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to share information on 76 Church, and it's an opportunity to speak with city staff to have some of your questions answered. For more information, you can visit the project website. If you go to www.toronto.ca//shelter replacement and expansion project, you can then click on 76 Church and you'll find up-to-date information there. It'll be posted as information becomes available. If you're having any trouble connecting to the audio on your computer, you can find information to connect via the www.toronto.ca/physical distancing shelters. So it's all no space, physical distancing shelters. For accessibility, if you need accommodation, phoning in is better than computer audio, and the adaptive technology on your phone works better if you do telephone in. So you can be watching the screen and use your phone to call in. Wonderful. Next slide, please. Marcus, next slide. Thank you. I would like to welcome Monica Waldman for the land acknowledgement. Slide back.
Good evening, everyone. We would like to acknowledge the land we are on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. And I'd just like to reflect, I think it's important when you do a land acknowledgement to reflect how it impacts you. And I think about how human beings, we like to be in person together, to have dialogue, to have debates, to have conversations, to make eye contact, and to look at how our body language communicates. But because of the state of the world we're in now, we've had to make do with things virtually. And so we will make the most of this evening together through this different kind of a forum. And I hope that it's a good night for everybody to be able to communicate the things on their mind and how to have a good and productive meeting. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Monica. Next slide, please. A reminder that this meeting is being recorded, and so all your opinions, your statements, your voice will become part of public record. Participants are asked not to share any personal information about themselves and other people, such as your name, address, contact information. So during the course of the meeting, please do not share this information. If you wish to discuss a private matter, please contact us at clc.76church@gmail.com. So we monitor this email regularly and we'll be able to respond to you. The recording and a summary of the meeting will be available on the website after the session. The recording will be closed captioned format on the website. You'll get a link to, I think, a YouTube recording. So if you do include personal information, it'll be included in the recording if shared. So we will just remind you once again not to share that. If the recording button has not been pressed, I would ask staff to make sure we're recording live. Next slide, please. And for the evening, we have a number of presenters. We'll be presenting first and then open up for questions and answers. You have myself and my colleague Maria Crawford are the Community Engagement Facilitation team. We are with Barnes Management Group. We'll have Councillor Kristen Wong Tam for Ward 13. Loretta Ramadan, Project Director of Infrastructure, Planning and Development with the Shelter Support and Housing Administration, City of Toronto, and Monica Waldman, who you've just met, the Manager of Seton House, Junction Place, and Traveler Services. Next slide. The purpose of, so today's meeting is divided into the two parts, really the presentation portion and the Q&A. The first portion will take about 45 minutes and the Q&A, the bulk of the meeting for 60 minutes. And then we'll just close up briefly with next steps. So in the Q&A, we will be taking questions in the Q&A portion. They can be typed in and we'll be answering calls from those of you who would like to ask a question. We'll explain how to do this as we proceed in the slides. And again, we'll explain how to do so in the Q&A portion of this meeting. Next slide, please. So the purpose, again, for tonight is to provide an overview of the 76 Church Street temporary shelter programs, services, and supports that are currently being planned for the site. We wish to respond to any questions or concerns and offers of support from the community. And the aim is to contribute to the success of the shelter in the community, integration of residents into the community. Next slide, please. I'd like to invite Councillor Kristen Wong-Tam to open up the meeting with some welcoming remarks. Councillor Wong-Tam, please.
Thank you very much, Violetta, and thank you very much, Monica, for the land acknowledgement. It's certainly very good to be here with all of you. I wish we were here under different circumstances, of course, but I think it's important that you have taken some time to join the city staff to learn more about what's happening at 76 Church Street, but also in the neighborhood. Violetta and Maria are third-party facilitators, and I look forward to having them guide us through this discussion this evening. So many of you are already obviously in touch with my office, and I have certainly been, through my staff person, Edward LaRusick, have been fielding phone calls and also replying to your inquiries. I hope that we've done a good job, just because as information is becoming available to us, our job is to relay it to you. But tonight, we're all going to get a fuller briefing on what will be largely transpiring on the site and some of the service changes and who's going to be here. So I think it's important for us to recognize that, you know, the global pandemic has changed just about everything as we know it. We would normally be meeting in a community center or a hotel ballroom. That is just not possible at this point in time. Just as much as that's the way we would have conventionally met, 76 Church Street was also a place of refuge. I think it was a long time established building that welcomed weary travelers, economic-minded visitors to our city. And from there, we were able to sort of showcase the very best that we can from our neighborhood, but also the downtown and our urban center. The pandemic has shut down the international borders. We recognize that things are not going back to normal tomorrow, and hotels, motels, hostels, as well as student residents quickly hollowed out when those borders were shut. So we found ourselves in a situation at the City of Toronto where we had obviously, you know, basically a recession that was induced by a lockdown by way of the tourism sector basically coming to a grinding halt. At the same time, we found ourselves with empty hotel buildings all over the city and people struggling, especially the operators, to make ends meet. And then layering on top of that, we saw the social inequities of the pandemic reveal itself. So more people growing hungry, more people finding themselves without adequate hours for work, finding themselves falling into further and further hardship, including new homelessness. So the city is now largely responding as we have been over the last year, and this has been very difficult work. I suspect that you have all, each and every single one of you, endured your own hardships, lots of personal sacrifices to be made, but the city was also responding to the needs of residents in Toronto. And one of those needs was trying to manage the homelessness crisis that just seems to keep growing. And this is on top of work that we were already doing. So we're here tonight to largely understand and to share information with you about two things. One is George Street Revitalization and the efforts underway to actually tear down and to rebuild in a modern contemporary fashion Canada's largest, one of Canada's largest men's shelter. For those who don't know, the Seton House is one of our nascent, is an adjacent neighborhood, and it's actually located at 339 George Street. I wish that we had lots of good news coming out of Seton House, but sometimes when we do hear about Seton House, it's not always great. And that's largely because it's a failed model. So it's a shelter of 581 beds. That's 581 men, many of them who've been longtime involved, who have not been able to find a pathway to independent living and housing. And we know that warehousing people in that fashion just doesn't work. And so that has to change. And part of the mandate that we have from the province of Ontario is to actually rebuild it and to diversify the portfolio within with respect to programming, and to actually build the type of programming that will enable healthier living. I won't go into all those programmatic changes because I know staff will, but I can tell you that it will no longer be 581 shelter bed. We will never do that again in the City of Toronto, although I was not part of the group that did that, and you were not part of the group that made those decisions. The decision was made and we are living with the consequences. So we need to now address that and fix that as quickly as possible. So the program changes are going to be significant. It is a very large, significant capital investment going into the Garden District, which will, I think, have ripple effects across every neighborhood with respect to jobs, as well as better community health, better social integration. So that's one of the things that is bringing us forward to today's conversation, and how 76 Church Street will become a temporary shelter, converted from a hospital to a temporary shelter for 55 of those men from Seton House. And there's going to be wraparound supports and other ancillary supports for them while they're here in the neighborhood. I want to just acknowledge that COVID-19 has also brought to us the type of social inequities that we oftentimes hear about and sometimes we read about, but now it's right on our doorsteps in ways that cannot be ignored. And some of it is manifest in the encampments at St. James Park. And the City of Toronto, of course, is working, 24/7 to try to address that issue. There's over 400 different types of structures and encampment tents across 75 parks in the city. St. James Park is one of them, and the city has its eyes on trying to rapidly house those individuals so that they have a pathway to recovery and a life filled with dignity. When the staff first brought the issue of relocating some of our residents from George Street and Seton House to this neighborhood, I raised a few things for them to consider, and I know that you'll probably share in some of those concerns. I wanted to make sure that we could, number one, coordinate any type of future shelter operations that are going to take place around the corner at 67 Adelaide Street East when it opens, the Adelaide location sometime in 2024 or perhaps 2025. We want to make sure that those facilities are going to be well situated in the neighborhood, but not cause any harm and disruption, but welcome additions to the neighborhood. We want to make sure, and I raised this with staff, and staff fully agreed, I'm happy to report, that the new facility here at 76 Church Street was also going to have wraparound supports. So therefore, people who are staying in the shelter will have support so that they can actually try to find a way to stabilize their lives. And once again, it's all about building a pathway out of homelessness, out of the shelter system, and into permanent housing. And then finally, this is why I'm grateful for Violetta and Maria, is I said that we probably needed to have third-party facilitators so that the city staff and I can actively listen and participate in this discussion, and that they can also guide and help us manage the flow of conversation this evening. And they will be able to continue to do that after this evening as well. So I'm going to bring my remarks to an end, but I just wanted to say that I am listening, and I know that city staff are going to work really hard, very committed to making sure that the service is going to be successful. But it's not just the success of the shelter, but it's actually the success of the community that I am deeply interested in. And I know that that is the case for my staff person, Edward LaRusick, as I know it is just as important for each and every single one of you. So thank you very much, Violetta, for the opportunity. I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Councillor Wong Tam. If we could move to the next slide. We just want to cover Webex, which is the platform that we are using for this event, and accessibility once again. If you require any accessibility related accommodation, adaptive technologies on your phone will work best. So calling in is advised. Panelists will describe the content on the slides during the presentation. So if you are calling in, you just are missing the visual, but you will not miss the information. The video recording of this meeting will be closed captioned when it is posted to the project website. While you are listening, you can try to familiarize yourself with the Webex platform on your phone and computer right now, and try raising and unraising your hand to ask a question. We will not be asking those questions until the Q&A portion, but you can sort of play around just to familiarize yourself. How to type questions into the Q&A box helps to make the meeting move more smoothly. We'll review how to do this together once again during the Q&A portion, but just to make sure everybody is able to participate as fully as they would wish. Next slide, please. As with many meetings, especially with a number of people, we have at least 40 have joined and a number of panelists. We do have a code of conduct that we will follow, and as facilitator, I will be reminding if there's any reason to. So just in summary, be brief, limit yourself to one question or comment at a time. Be a good listener, share the space with your neighbors. There will be other opportunities to engage and offer feedback and insight. So if you don't get all your questions answered tonight, there will be other ways to make sure that we know about any of your ideas, your feedback, your questions, and provide that information back to you. This is the only shop. This is one in a suite of activities that we'll be working on and already have been. Please be patient. We do our best to resolve any technical issues if they occur. So we're all just doing our best here and trying to make sure this meeting goes smoothly, and again, that everyone can hear properly and participate. Please be respectful. The City of Toronto is an inclusive public organization. Racist or other forms of prejudicial, derogatory, discriminatory comments, questions, including name calling, will not be tolerated. Okay. Next slide, please. During the question and answer period, city staff will continuously monitor and review the Q&As to ensure that the most common issues are addressed in tonight's meeting. After the presentation, participants can ask questions and make comments in two ways. You can type in a question into the Q&A box on the lower right of the screen. If you're tuned in via the internet on your computer, you'll be able to see a Q&A box on the lower right of the screen. And you can put your hand up to ask a question verbally on audio. You can do this also on the computer and the phone. So on the computer, there's a little raise hand toggle, and on the phone, we'll give instructions of how to do that. Once you have been called on and you've asked your questions, we would ask that you lower your hand so that we don't call on you again, and we can get through and have as many participants who have joined us ask the questions they need to ask, and then we'll loop back around again. Next slide, please. So we're just going to go right into our first presentation, and I'd like to introduce Loretta Ramadan, Project Director for Infrastructure Planning and Development with SSHA, which is Shelter Support and Housing Administration with the City of Toronto. And Loretta will give an overview of the City of Toronto Shelter Services. Loretta, I'd invite you to unmute and bring your video up.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you for taking the time this evening to hear more about 76 Church Street and the services and supports planned for the site. I will be walking you through a presentation that provides an overview of homelessness in Toronto and the services that Shelter Support and Housing Administration provides. I hope this presentation addresses some of the questions that you may have, and after the presentation, staff will be available to answer your questions or respond to your concerns. Next slide. This slide provides a context of homelessness in Toronto. Homelessness has been on the rise since 2011, and we know that people who become homeless are staying in our shelters longer than they have in the past. Roughly 48% of the total are considered to be chronically homeless, meaning they have been homeless for 6 months or more in the past year. Even before the pandemic, our shelter system was near capacity, despite having added over 3,500 spaces in the last few years, which had almost doubled the size of the shelter system. Toronto's shelter system provides more than 6,000 spaces to support those experiencing homelessness, including 3,000 spaces in new temporary shelters and hotel programs. Challenges and pressures in the shelter system have been compounded by the opioid crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. Although occupancy in the shelter system has decreased since the start of the pandemic, largely driven by a decline in the number of refugee claimants and families, capacity for single individuals is currently higher than the same period last year. SSHA conducted its 5th Streets Needs Assessment in April 2021. This is a citywide point-in-time count and survey of people experiencing homelessness in Toronto, conducted in collaboration with community partners in the homelessness sector. Results will be released publicly by September 2021. Our last Streets Needs Assessment in 2018 estimated that there were almost 9,000 people in Toronto who were homeless on any given night, and more than 500 of them were staying outside. The results of the 2021 Streets Needs Assessment will provide critical data to understand the impact of the pandemic on homelessness and broader needs and barriers to services for people experiencing homelessness in Toronto. Next slide. This slide shows that programs are located in communities across the city. The yellow and green dots that you see on the slide represent temporary shelter programs that were activated to support physical distancing requirements. The red dots are the base shelter programs. The little green circles are schools across the city, and the purple dots are childcare centers. As you can see, availability of emergency shelters varies across the city. Shelter Support and Housing Administration is the division at the city who manages the emergency shelter system. We currently oversee over 80 shelters and 24-hour respite sites that are operated by skilled community agencies, and we directly operate over 20 shelter programs. Our knowledge, expertise, and responsibility is focused on 3 outcomes. 1, to provide people experiencing homelessness in Toronto access to safe and high-quality emergency shelter. 2, to provide people with housing-focused supports that ensure homelessness is rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. And 3, to ensure low-income households have access to housing benefit programs that provide affordability and stability. Providing emergency shelter for people who are experiencing homelessness is an important community service that is offered across the city. Sites are located within communities, which means that they are often located near other community services like childcare centers, schools, and parks. Shelters are located within communities not only because it's important for people staying at these locations to be connected to the community, but also shelters are only allowed in areas that are zoned as residential or mixed-use commercial residential. We cannot open shelters in areas zoned as industrial or employment lands. Next slide. This slide shows the city's COVID-19 response for people experiencing homelessness. I know that everyone recognizes that these are extraordinary times and as such required us to deploy unique solutions. Since 2020, Toronto has implemented the most comprehensive response to COVID-19 for people experiencing homelessness in Canada. We focused on infection prevention, recovery, and housing. Approximately 3,600 people were moved to support physical distancing requirements. This plan continues to evolve and respond to current conditions, staying one step ahead to protect and prioritize people experiencing homelessness. We currently have 25 temporary sites active that were open to create physical distancing in the shelter system and provide space for people to move indoors from encampments. The city is also supporting the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine for people experiencing homelessness. As of April 23rd, over 1,900 people in the shelter system have received at least one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. As of March 2021, just under 6,000 people have moved from the shelter system to permanent housing during the pandemic. Next slide. This slide shows the temporary shelter programs activated in response to COVID-19 by ward. There are 25 temporary sites active that were opened across Toronto as part of our COVID-19 response. Given the number of sites that we needed, the city conducted an exhaustive search for space. We received inquiries and referrals from hotel operators, property managers, community members, developers, and landlords. The city is continuously reviewing its portfolio of temporary shelters to achieve physical distancing in the shelter system. Next slide. This slide describes the number of shelter programs downtown. These numbers reflect the maximum funded or contracted capacities. We recognize that Ward 13 has always had the most shelter beds in Toronto. Significant changes were required in existing programs to adhere to Toronto Public Health guidance for physical distancing during COVID-19. This table details the shelter capacity in Ward 13 on March 15, 2020, which is the pre-COVID-19 capacity, as 1,719 beds. And in April 30th, 2021, which is the current capacity, as 1,226 beds. There has been an overall reduction of shelter capacity in Ward 13 by 493 beds in the past year, even with the addition of temporary hotel programs. Also, additional relocations and bed closures are planned for Ward 13 in 2021, including relocations required as part of the George Street Revitalization. The COVID-19 Interim Shelter Recovery Strategy identifies 12 priority actions for the next 12 months, including actions to invest in housing and supports to decrease the volume and duration needed for emergency shelters. Next slide. This slide provides an overview of criteria for selecting a new shelter location. As many of you have asked how we make decisions on the sites that are selected for a new shelter, I would like to spend a few minutes sharing information that I hope is helpful. People experience homelessness for many reasons. Any one of us could experience homelessness at any time. Our goal is to ensure there are services in all neighborhoods so that as much as possible, people can stay within their communities, maintain their employment, and stay connected with friends and family if they experience homelessness. We comply with city bylaws and Toronto's housing charter. We work with our corporate real estate management division to source potential properties based on required criteria. Once a potential property that meets the zoning requirements is identified, we assess the suitability of the location for its access to transit and other services in the communities, such as libraries, public parks, pharmacies, and healthcare services. In 2017, the City Council delegated the authority to open new sites to staff. This means that sites are secured prior to commencing community engagement. In our normal process, we engage with communities after the site is secured and approximately 6 months before a site opens. The focus of that engagement is the integration of the new program into the community. Next slide. This slide shows additional criteria for site selection during COVID-19. During the pandemic, we had to implement innovative ways to respond quickly. Our goal was to save lives and ensure our healthcare system did not become overwhelmed. We conducted an exhaustive search for locations, and looking for temporary locations rather than permanent ones. We focused on spaces that were more or less turnkey ready for operations with minimal retrofits required. We looked for sites that would adequately allow us to meet physical distancing guidelines and were available right away. Lastly, we looked for sites that were close to transit and were accessible. Next slide.
Thanks so much, Loretta. Next, I will call on Monica Waldman, the manager at Seton House, Junction Place and Travelers Hostel with SSHA City of Toronto. Monica is going to walk us through the George Street Revitalization Project and provide a program overview of temporary GSR shelter programming at 76 Church. Monica, please unmute.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So as Violetta said, I'm going to get started kind of giving you an overview of the George Street Revitalization. And then I will get into the details of how we got to where we are at 76 Church Street. So as you might be aware, the George Street Revitalization, which we like to call GSR, the city is big on acronyms, so please forgive us. The George Street Revitalization Project was first approved in principle by City Council in July 2013, with a number of divisions involved, including Shelter Support and Housing Administration, Senior Services and Long-Term Care, Social Development and Finance Administration, and the Affordable Housing Office at the time. It's important to know that the George Street Revitalization is not happening in isolation. And I think one of the keys as being part of the City of Toronto is looking at how there can be dynamic opportunities for different large-scale projects to complement each other. And this is where many of you are familiar with the Downtown East Action Plan. The Downtown East Action Plan was created, I think, both with a lot of support and championing by Councillor Wong Tam, as well as many constituents and folks living and working in the area. The area covered by the Downtown East Action Plan is bound by Bloor Street to the north, Front Street to the south, Bay Street to the west, and the Don Valley Parkway on the east. As you all know, the area has historically faced a number of challenges related to poverty, homelessness, housing, community safety, mental health and substance use, and particularly over the last few years, really the opioid epidemic. And a number of city initiatives have joined together to see how we can strengthen and build capacity in this area of the city, how we could work more collaboratively and in an integrated way so that there aren't pieces of work being siloed. So some of the, oh, sorry, next slide. I should have said that a while ago. A number of city initiatives have been undertaken in this area, and that includes the Tenants First project, Toronto Public Health Supervised Consumption Services, the focus tables, many of you might know about, which is furthering our communities by uniting services, community crisis response, And of course, we made the connection with the George Street Revitalization. So naturally, the work being done with George Street Revitalization will have a huge and positive impact on the community. And so we're looking for opportunities on how to bring together the needs identified in the Downtown East Action Plan to be actualized as part of the GSR. So the GSR is a shared service facility resulting from the redevelopment of Seton House to combine shelter services, long-term care, affordable housing, and a large community hub. So it really is a true continuum of services. So with that, the City Council directed staff in June 2018 to establish a multi-divisional team to develop a 12-month and then initially and then a 5-year action plan addressing the community and service coordination needs with this work, both currently and ongoing. And I will get into it in a little bit more, some of where things intersect with the GSR. So keeping that in mind, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is the current Seton House, and to the north, you'll see the schoolhouse, which is run by Dixon Hall, as well as some properties that are going to be incorporated into the George Street Revitalization once construction begins. So when we need to move out of this building for the construction to happen, we're going to have to relocate everybody who's currently living at Seton House, as well as the schoolhouse, into other shelter sites. And then some of those programs will be returning upon completion of the construction of the new George Street facility. So the vision for this project is to bring transformational change to the George Street neighborhood and the greater downtown east. So you're probably familiar with Seton House, and I think Councillor Wong Tam mentioned some of the key pieces of, you know, where we don't want to replicate things, where we've learned some really good and tough lessons that will help inform us to bring the most innovative, high quality services in a way that is going to, you know, promote positive outcomes for the clientele that we serve and for the surrounding community. So it's a new shared facility. It will provide a dynamic range of housing, integrated and specialized programs and services to meet the unique and complex needs of homeless people, vulnerable people, and elderly individuals in the community. We want to see George Street become an asset to the community that the community is proud of. So you might also be wondering about the scale and magnitude of the project. And so as I had talked about at the beginning, it starts on the northeast side of George Street at the schoolhouse. And I should know the address. I think it might be 395 George Street, all the way down to the laneway to the south of those houses, which is at 295 George Street. So it's quite a significant parcel of land that we're talking about. Okay. Oh, 349 George Street. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to point out that this is an architect's rendering. This isn't exactly what it's going to look like, but just to kind of give folks a visual, you can see underneath the renderings the different services that are going to be embedded in these buildings. So there will be a 100-bed emergency shelter. There will also be 21 units of affordable housing with supports, a very large community and service hub that will have a wealth of services and programs available to both the residents in the building on George Street as well as the surrounding community. There are going to be 378 beds for long-term care. And of those, there will be a 64-bed specialized unit for folks who have experienced homelessness and complex issues to help ease the pathway into long-term care for those who are eligible. We will also have a 130-bed transitional living program for people who have a history of homelessness and require a higher level of health supports. And so you can see that there's a lot of potential with this. And we're looking at smaller programs, diversified programs, so it's not just for one population of people, and it's services that everybody can use. There are also plans for a significant public art program and streetscape improvements on George Street between Dundas East and Gerrard Street East. So the vision is really for the entire street, including what is now the roadway, to become a welcoming gathering place for the community. So until that happens, as I mentioned, people need to move out of the buildings, go to other programs, and then 2 of the programs are going to be temporary. And when the rebuild happens, which is expected in 2026, those 2 programs would be returning to this site. One of those programs is now going to be the Travelers Hostel program at 76 Church Street. So let me talk a little bit now about the Seton House transition plan. If you can go to the next slide, please. Okay. So in the plan, we've had a few initiatives thus far. Part of the George Street transitional plan has been to open up a new shelter program at 3306 Kingston Road and add an additional 40 beds. And folks who were living at Seton House who were 55 years of age and older with complex healthcare needs have moved to that site. And again, that is part of this overall GSR program, and it opened in April 2019. Also, we were able to open what has been called Junction Place, which is a shelter run under my portfolio. It is an emergency shelter for men, and we had men who were living in the Seton House emergency shelter program transfer to this site. We went through a whole process with folks, and we've received a lot of positive feedback from both the service users, the staff, as well as the surrounding community. We opened a 66-bed program there. So as you can see, we've gone from a capacity of 581 to now much smaller programs like this one. It opened in November 2019 with 66 beds. And we have worked really hard to build in robust programming and create a real sense of community at this site. Okay, so next slide, please. Just before I get into that, the plan has also involved relocating Seton House clients to buildings that have been renovated that meet the AODA compliance. We do have a lot of clients with mobility needs. There's better signage, broader hallways, it's brighter, more open. We've moved away from these massive dorms. We are now pet friendly because we have found in the shelter system a lot of folks who end up living outdoors do so because there are no places that are pet friendly, and their pet is their family and they don't want to leave them. We will be having some all gender sites, including the site that I mentioned, 3306 Kingston Road, is going to become an all gender site. And we try to have a maximum of 4 people per room. So we've had some dorms at Seton House that have had well over 25 people in a dorm, which obviously was pre-COVID and something that we know was not ideal and something that we would not want to replicate again. The third site that we will be opening is 705 Progress, which is in Scarborough. It's slated to open mid to end of the summer. And again, we will be having clients from Seton House move to this site, as well as our staff, and try and have all of the robust programming and really be able to have more intensive case management with folks once that happens. So we're quite excited for that. And then the lease at 76 Church Street. So initially it was to be a COVID site for us because we had 581 men in one building when the pandemic hit. And now we have had the lease extended to, and it will remain open and continue to provide shelter services for residents of Seton House until the project is complete, at which point the folks that are living at 76 Church Street would relocate back to George Street to that 100-bed emergency shelter program that I had mentioned. In addition to that, the city is working on finding permanent housing for some clients. Since January 2018, 118 beds have been closed as part of the GSR decommissioning plan, and the individuals associated with those beds were successfully housed across a combination of housing options, including social housing, long-term care homes, and supportive housing units. And to ensure the success of client transition plans, we know that we can't do it alone. We rely heavily on our community partners, and that includes housing and health partners. We've been very lucky to work closely with folks such as Fife House, Habitat Services, Inner City Family Health Team, Inner City Health Associates, and many others along the way. Okay, so next slide, please. So here we are at 76 Church Street. And just to repeat, in April 2020, the site was open as part of the city's response to COVID-19. It has been operated as a 55-bed, 24-hour shelter. At full capacity, the site has the ability to operate at 67 beds, but of course, that would be pending Toronto Public Health's recommendations around physical distancing in sleeping areas. So, as mentioned, we had 581 men living at 339 George Street. And then when the pandemic hit, we had to relocate quite a number of men to other sites. This was one of the sites. So currently our capacity on George Street for the Seton House is 208. So we went from 581 to 208 to be able to operate safely and within COVID guidelines. So we're very thankful that we were able to secure this building to ensure the health and safety of all of our clients and of our staff as well. The shelter provides services to adults who identify as male, and we are currently leasing the site. In February 2021, the lease was extended until April 30th, 2026, which, if everything goes well, which of course it will with the reconstruction on George Street, it will be a smooth transition back there for us. So initially it was all clients coming from Seton House, but as attrition has happened, people have moved out, people have left, the beds have been opened up through our central intake line to receive other men who are experiencing homelessness across Toronto. And I am actually proud to say that we do have 2 housing workers, and we are anticipating getting a 3rd one soon, but between September and May, September 2020 and May 2021, we've housed 36 people from this site. So that continues to be a high priority for us, which I will talk about in a little bit. Next slide, please. Okay, so this program, as mentioned, it's operated by the City of Toronto staff. We're going to be providing, and we do provide, counseling and supportive programming. We're on site 24/7, available to clients and to provide crisis support. We provide all meals on site. In terms of our COVID response, we've got a relationship with both St. Mike's Hospital and Inner City Health Associates in place for vaccinations. We did do our first round of vaccinations. And of course, we will continue as we get access to more vaccinations to offer that to men who are staying in the program. Our on-site services are for shelter clients only. And all infection prevention and control recommendations for containing COVID-19 have been implemented. I also want to let you know that, Seton House has been on the block for many years, and we have an incredibly talented and experienced staff team. So opening up a new program wasn't like starting from scratch for us in a lot of ways. We were able to carry a lot of our learnings and experience to this new site, and we're relying on our good relationships with providers in the community to try and ensure that we're offering a good service to the folks that are staying there. So our staff are skilled in engagement strategies, crisis management, and de-escalation. Our program model includes culturally sensitive case management and programming, with our clients developing capacity and life skills that will help them to successfully transition from the shelter into their own home. Next slide, please. So in terms of community safety, it is absolutely a priority for the city whenever and wherever new services open. As well, I could say with my own staff team that is important, and that's a key proponent of our work. We bring management practices that have proven successful, and all staff are trained on things that I had mentioned, like de-escalation and conflict resolution. If a resident is found to have done something to jeopardize the health and safety of other clients or staff, they'll be held accountable, which may result in their discharge from the shelter. We also, we know the importance of building a positive relationship with 51 Division. That's critical to our operations. We have a good relationship with them from our work at Seton House, and we anticipate carrying that over to this site as well. Additionally, we do have security cameras for the safety of staff and clients. We have in the back, around the very back of the building, and the front around the entrance of the building, as well as inside the building. Okay, next slide, please. So now I want to get a little bit into the programming and the operations, like what happens inside the building. We want to support people in working on their goals. So as I mentioned, housing and case management supports are crucial. We really do emphasize housing. We believe that everyone not only has a right to housing, but with the proper supports in place can be successful in their housing. We rely on our community partnerships, as I've mentioned before. We've got a partnership with Toronto Employment and Social Services and ODSP, and we actually were part of a pilot project with Toronto Employment and Social Services to do virtual case management. So right now, it's a very hard time for people to be able to access their workers during COVID. So we piloted that project. It was a huge success, and it looks like that pilot is going to be built on, and we are expecting to be able to continue with that, which really gets our clients that access that they need to income supports and other resources to be able to successfully move into housing. We also will continue to look at building on partnerships as we establish ourselves in this community. And certainly we typically have had relationships with our local community centers, public libraries, animal services, and other local community agencies. In terms of our services and programming, we try and get creative. Of course, it has been difficult during COVID because we don't want our clients to gather in tight spaces together. We do have harm reduction programming and supplies distribution on site. We work on daily activities and programming to help promote people being able to be successful in their own apartments. And we've even done things like a monthly TED Talks. Some of you may have heard of TED Talks on special hot topics as a way to build capacity with our clients who are staying at the shelter. In terms of community engagement, I think Violetta will talk about that later and some of our hopes with building a community liaison committee. For employment supports, we have a specialized employment support worker who comes in 3 to 4 times a week to help clients with anything from their resumes, accessing training programs, employment and life skills enhancement. And that person is available both for pre-scheduled appointments and drop-in assistance. We hold a free annual tax clinic as well with industry professionals. And finally, our health partnerships, we realize how critical it is to have robust partnerships with the health sector. We have a partnership with Inner City Family Health Team. We have a registered nurse and social worker come in once a week to work with clients on mental health and substance use, as well as health issues. And we're in the process of securing a psychiatrist to come in once a week to run a clinic. We're just working out the details for that. And we hope to also have a medical clinic there soon. Physicians are hard to find right now, but we're certainly, that is one of our goals, to be able to host a clinic. We work holistically with clients on a wide range of goals that they identify as priorities. So that could include things like financial, employment, health, family reunification, and other supports. Okay, next slide, please. I'm almost done my part, everyone. So rights and responsibilities. I think you know, a lot of you are wondering, well, what do we talk to clients about when they come in, and what expectations do we have of them living in this community? And we certainly do have. We certainly promise to provide a high caliber service to our clients, and we do have expectations that we are part of a community. We don't want to be an island onto ourselves. We don't want to be the source of problems. We want to be part of the solutions, and we want to be seen as an asset in the community. So shelter residents, they're equal citizens of the city. They have the same rights, freedoms, and responsibilities as other residents of the city. They do have a right to a safe place to shelter and a welcoming program. And as I mentioned, one of our goals is to embed the shelter into the community and foster a sense of belonging. There are expectations and rules for all clients that must be followed when staying in the shelter, and this includes what we call our Good Neighbors policy. We have it at all of our shelters. It is reviewed with all shelter clients upon intake into the program. We also talk about any community issues and expectations at regular meetings that we host with clients. We review rules. There's an intake process that talks about their rights. There's Toronto shelter standards that we follow as well. And again, we want to be a good neighbor. And we want to create a sense of ethos and responsibility. And that includes things like keeping the area around the building clean and having clients be a part of making that happen. And yeah, I think that It's close to the end. I will also say that if somebody is discharged, which they might be discharged, again, as I had mentioned, if they are compromising the health and safety of any folks inside the building or around the vicinity of the building, it could end up in a discharge. And we typically would never just say, okay, you have to leave. We are mandated by Toronto Shelter Standards to find a referral and to provide transportation fare for that person to get to a new shelter. So I just wanted to make sure that you know that that's clear, that we try and make a seamless referral. And that's it for me for now.
Thank you so much, Monica. It's really fulsome information. If we could go to the next slide. We are a little bit behind in the presentations, but this is our final one, and it's fairly brief. And I'd like to call on my colleague, Maria Crawford, who is with me and the Community Engagement Facilitation team for this site. We are third-party facilitators with Barnes Management Group. Maria, if you could unmute yourself, Maria will provide us with a little overview of the community engagement process. Maria?
Thank you, Violetta, and thank you, Monica, for such a great comprehensive overview of all of the programs and GSR. And good evening, everyone. I'd like to just take a few minutes now to provide an overview of the community engagement activities for 76 Church Street. Next slide, please. The city is committed to community engagement to ensure the success of the shelter in the community and to ensure the success of the shelter in the community, not only for the people who live in the shelter, but also for the people who live in the neighborhood around the shelter. The community engagement process typically begins much earlier, before the opening of a new service. But due to the COVID-19 pandemic accelerating the pace of opening new temporary sites, engagement activities are not always able to take place prior to the service opening. And that was the case at 76 Church Street. More information on community engagement is available on the project website. And you can also sign up to receive email bulletins and updates, including tonight's meeting summary, and you can sign up at clc.76churchstreet@gmail.com. Just to give you a highlight of some of the community engagement activities that we currently have underway. Initially is bringing a community engagement facilitation team on board. That's Violetta and myself from Barnes Management Group. We're tracking community concerns and following up. We've held a number of key stakeholder meetings with various groups in the community and the surrounding area. We're issuing community updates by way of regular bulletins, and you can get on that list to receive those bulletins by emailing us at that CLC email address. We're also facilitating a community information session, which is tonight's meeting. We'll be convening and hosting a community safety walk, as well as the formation of a community liaison committee. Next slide, please. So what we've heard so far, and we're midway through the process, but we have met with a number of key stakeholders in the community. We've met with local businesses and BIAs, local resident groups, condo boards, property managers, co-op housing boards, local community agencies and organizations. And we also plan to meet with Police Services 5051 Division, as well as to meet with residents at 76 Church Shelter. Some of the things that we've heard so far in our discussions with people, people have raised concerns about safety and security issues, about cleanliness and loitering, drug use, hygiene issues and access, and we've heard some concerns from local business owners. We've also heard a lot of really positive feedback and overall support for the shelter, and in particular how it's operated, and just, you know, You could tell from Monica's presentation how diligent she is to all the details that ensure a successful shelter operation. And we've heard from a number of people just how responsive the staff at the shelter are when they've had any contact. And we've also noticed a real significant absence of complaints with respect to shelter residents at 76 Church, and an acknowledgement by many of the people that a lot of the issues that are currently being experienced are more likely with residents or with respect to homeless individuals in the community as opposed to individual residents at 76 Church Street Shelter. So I think those are important things to acknowledge as well. And that's it for my snapshot around community engagement, and I'll hand it back to Violetta.
Thanks so much, Maria. Next slide, please. So now we are going into the Q&A portion of our session together, and I'm just going to walk through some of the technical bits and then we'll get rolling. If we can go to the next slide, please. So once again, the meeting is being recorded. This is a repeat of a previous slide, and a reminder that your opinions, your statements, your voice will be part of public record. And we remind you to please not share any personal information about yourself or any other people. So please don't share full names, addresses, or contact information. And once again, you can email us with any additional questions if we don't get to them at this meeting at clc.76church@gmail.com. Next slide, please. Some of the basics for WebEx on the laptop and desktop. You can raise your hand. There's an icon in the lower right panel. It's a little hand. If you press that icon, it will raise your hand. If selected, the facilitator will say your name and unmute you. After your question is asked, we will put you back on mute. If you could press the icon again to put your hand down so that we don't repeat calling on you. There is also a Q&A box which allows you to submit a typed question. Only staff are able to see the submitted questions, and we are not responding to those questions by typing in. We will be calling those questions out and having them responded to so everyone can hear. Your question will be redirected to the panelist, to one of our panelists to answer verbally. So the Q&A panel at the bottom, just press to toggle between opening and closing participants and the Q&A panels. So it will show opened and closed. And there, if you click on the Q&A, you'll be able to post your question. Just a note that in addition to the presenters that we've had this evening, we'll also be joined by the Encampments Team Supervisor, Kamalesh, and 51 Division Sergeant Henry Dick to join in and answer any particular questions related a little bit outside of 76 Church. Next slide, please. So if you are calling in on the phone, or if you're having trouble getting a question asked, you can call in, dial 416-915-6530. The access code is 133-673-2730. So you can ask questions verbally. To raise your hand via the telephone, dial *3. The facilitator will see the hand raised and beside the first 3 digits of your phone number, alerting us that you'd like to ask a question. So we do not see your name when you call in. We see the first 3 numbers of your phone. So we'll unmute you. We'll let you know you can speak. You should hear a little beep when we unmute you. And when you're finished your question, please press *3 to put down your hand. Next slide, please. So in this portion, we'll do our very best to receive as many questions as possible between the various methods you have to participate. So we will be rotating between live phone-in questions, questions received in advance. People have emailed us at the Gmail account. And so we do have a series of questions we'll be asking, and we will have, be going through the Q&A questions typed right now. I see some questions are coming through. So we're continuously monitoring, city staff are monitoring the Q&As to ensure the most common issues are addressed in tonight's meeting. If there are a lot of questions, we may not be able to get to all of them. Questions that we can't answer during this session will be answered through a follow-up frequently asked question document and community bulletin. So once again, if you'd like to receive those, please join our mailing list by emailing us at the Gmail address that we had noted previously. A brief reminder once again that we have a city's code of conduct for participation in all virtual meetings. Be brief, limit yourself to one question or comment at a time. Please be a good listener and share space, allowing others to also ask questions. Please be patient. We do our best to resolve any technical issues, which may pop up more during the Q&A as we're toggling through and muting and unmuting folks. And please be respectful. The City of Toronto is an inclusive public organization. And just a reminder that any racist or other prejudicial, derogatory, or discriminatory comments and questions, including name calling, will not be tolerated. So please, let's just have a really great conversation in the spirit of sharing. So why don't we get rolling with the Q&As? I will start there, and then perhaps just in process, I'll go from the Q&As to one of the previously sent in questions, and then we'll go to a live question from anyone on the phone. So our first question is there a way to get the number of shelters permanent and temporary, not just by ward, but by neighborhood? And can we get percentages, not just numbers? I'm going to direct this question at Loretta.
Hi, we can look into if there's a way to do the numbers by percentages. I don't believe our mapping department goes as detailed as neighborhoods. There are numbers and percentages that we could arrive based by ward. But I don't have that available at the tip of my fingers right now. So it would have to be something we'd follow up at a later date through our engagement team.
Okay, thank you, Loretta. I'm going to go to a previously sent in question. Many residences and businesses in the area have experienced vandalism, littering, loitering, and defecation, etc. on our property, which may or may not be caused by residents of 76 Church. What recourse do residents, property owners, businesses have to the shelter or the city for repair, compensation, cleanup, etc.? This is a broad question, and perhaps I'll start with Monica to take a stab at it, and then we'll see if the street encampment team has anything to add. Monica?
Sure. And hi, and I would also maybe advise if 51 Division wants to jump in, because certainly if there is illegal activity occurring in the community, then that is a police matter. We are not enforcement. That is their expertise and their scope of work. But certainly like I've mentioned, we want to be a good neighbor, and we take responsibility for the immediate surrounding of 76 Church Street. So any litter or anything's around there, we would, we make sure we go outside, and our staff and even our clients have come out and helped us clean up any garbage that's in the immediate area. I think as the person who asked the question said, there is no way to necessarily say if it is somebody coming directly from the shelter in terms of, using the public as a washroom. We have many washrooms inside of our building. Our clients have 24/7 access to the facility. And so, that would definitely surprise me. I think, in terms of encampments, I believe Kamalish can speak to some of the initiatives around putting some like porta potties in some of the encampment park areas to help with some of those issues. In terms of compensation, I think again, any of those things like vandalism would be considered criminal activity, and that should be directed to police. So it wouldn't be any kind of vehicle for compensation through the City of Toronto at that point. So Violetta, I'm not sure if Kamlesh or Sergeant Dick want to speak to this at all, but there's definitely, I think, a piece for each of them.
Absolutely. Thanks, Monica. Kamlesh, why don't I call on you first, and then Sergeant Henry Dick, I'll call on you after. Kamlesh, if you can unmute.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Yeah, I would concur what Monica just said, but in terms of the public washrooms, we have been diligent in actually trying to find and place public washrooms and porta potties in various encampments, especially the large ones that we have. We have got, like in Moss Park and at Trinity Bellwood, we do have washrooms and portable washrooms there to ensure that people have access to sanitation and hand washing facilities as well. And in terms of compensation and the other pieces, if it's a criminal offense, and that should be actually directed to the police, and police should be called in. And that's the way that we're going as well, in the same direction. But in terms of the porta potties, we will be looking, and we are looking at alternatives and offering others and other sites. And we've done as been directed to find appropriate places to put these portable washrooms.
Okay, Kamlesh, thank you. Sergeant Dick, do you have anything to add just around the community safety issue, any recourse?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, thanks for having us with you tonight. I want to make mention of the fact that I'm not here by myself, but I actually have PC Jason Lee sitting next to me. Come on in a little bit closer there, Jason, everybody can get a little good look at you. He's one of our neighbor community officers for your area. And his partner, who's over in 52 Division, PC Mark Kennedy, has dialed in by phone and is also online right now listening. And so we're hearing everything that you're saying and getting these questions so that we have a better understanding of what it is that your concerns are. And these guys are available for those kinds of concerns. You can always reach us very, very easily by simple email, which is to ynco@torontopolice.on.ca. That's ynco@torontopolice.on.ca. So I will say that when it comes to damage, mischief, those kinds of things, Monica is quite right that the best thing to do when, like, if your storefront window has been smashed by somebody, the best thing that you can do is to make a phone call to police, because if we are able to successfully find the suspect and arrest them, the courts do have a mechanism for compensation to the business owner. Now, I will say, in my many years downtown of working in downtown policing, you can't get blood from a stone. So, you know, if the person doesn't have any money, then it can be ordered, but you can't make somebody pay what they don't have. So, but there is mechanisms in the court system for compensation. And there is also a special fund that victims can apply for compensation as well. So there are a couple of different mechanisms through the court system for at least some form of compensation. While I have the opportunity, I also just want to take 2 seconds to say thank you very much to Monica for including us in your presentation. Monica is absolutely correct. I've had a long-standing relationship now with Monica and her staff at Seton House. We've solved many a problem together. And I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever that if there was something that required our presence more greatly, that Monica would pick up the phone and call me. She's got my cell phone number. And likewise, if I needed to, I also know that I can call her and things will get sorted out. So that's the kind of relationship we have, and it's much appreciated. And I just want to say, I don't know who your housing worker is, but I know other locations in the city of Toronto that have shared their numbers with me through various of these kinds of meetings that have been open much, much longer than this particular site has and are much larger, who haven't cracked the double-digit mark for the number of people that they've housed. So whoever your housing worker is that's housed 36 people since you've been open, you better hang on to them because they're doing a fantastic job. So thank you very much. And again, thank you for having us with you. I'll stay on in case there are other questions, but absolutely we're here to work with you, Monica, and your staff, and to try and help make sure that everything runs smoothly.
Great, thank you. I have, before just going to live questions, I have a related question in terms of finding feces and urine in front of stores and on the streets. So very specifically, who should they call? Monica, do you know, or Loretta? I see Monica's face, so you're on mute, Monica.
Oh. I'm not totally sure if this would be a solid waste management issue or not. I think it depends on where, if it's on public property or private property, but I think if it's on public property, I don't know how long it would take, but I believe you could call 311 to be directed to solid waste management to come and clean that up.
Great, thank you.
So Sergeant Dick is nodding his head, so I think I've given good information. Okay.
Thanks, Monica. Pardon me. So I'm going to ask Zuna and city staff to, I think we have a couple of hands raised, so we'll go to a live question.
Just to on top of what Monica has said, there's also a very good, not that they're out right now with COVID, but I'm sure they will be again once we get past the pandemic. Besides 311, which will work on, you know, if it's storefront on the sidewalk or something like that, definitely they will come by. But in your catchment area, the Downtown Young BIA also has a very, very good cleanup team. And so making connections with them as businesses is also great too, because they will also come by and do some cleanup of that nature as well.
Great, thank you. Okay.
Hi, Violetta. I'm going to unmute a community member by the name Nick.
Perfect.
Nick, you're unmute now, so you can ask your question.
Great. Hi, thank you so much. I am a health and safety specialist, and I've addressed some concerns regarding the health and safety, particularly gaps in the shelter standards. And I would like to discuss a few things. Whether or not you would consider getting AEDs as part of the mandatory requirements, bag valve masks, full PPE, if you were able to change the standard to having one certified person per shift to 2, and also considering changing your requirement for standard first aid level C to standard first aid basic life support, which would actually incorporate a lot of the critical skills that are very important for opioid overdose poisoning. And if indeed you are still running or operating from the same shelter standards, I think it's version 4.
Monica, I'm going to direct that one to you, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
And certainly if I miss a piece of answering this, then let me know. So first of all, I wanted to say I completely agree that we do have an AED on site at 76 Church Street, and we have staff that are trained to use that. And the company that we use makes sure that we are trained, and when it's been used, that the parts are replaced. I'm not an expert, so I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of it. All of our staff currently wear goggles and masks. We have, depending on the tasks, we have gowns, and of course we have gloves available for staff. We also distribute a minimum of 3 surgical masks, like I think it's level 2 surgical masks a day to clients. We can't force them to wear them, but it's constantly reinforced. We do screening every day for symptoms of COVID, or if they've been in contact with like a high-risk close contact. And that happens on a daily basis at our site. And the moment somebody doesn't pass that screening, we would be sending them out to one of the COVID assessment centers to get a test done. We are looking, the entire division is looking at, we are starting to pilot the rapid antigen testing, which is a 15-minute quick on the spot testing for COVID. It will probably be a little while before it would be launched at Travelers Hostel, but it's certainly something we're looking at in the shelter system. As well, 5 years ago, shortly after I came to Seton House, it was obvious to me that the opioid epidemic was happening full on at Seton House. So we were actually one of the first shelters to have naloxone administration on site. So at all of the shelters, I think pretty much in the city of Toronto now, have staff that are trained on naloxone administration. I don't think that the Toronto Shelter Standards has been updated to reflect that yet, but certainly Shelter Support and Housing Administration is committed to that and works closely with Toronto Public Health to ensure that we have that kind of access as part of our toolkit for medical emergencies. I'm not an expert on the different levels or what different things mean about first aid CPR, but we, as the City of Toronto does have a overall corporate policy on naloxone administration, and certainly it has identified that staff need to be trained as part of their first aid CPR through that realm. We also do give out naloxone kits and have the training available from the Works Toronto Public Health for clients themselves or folks who might have friends that are using. And I'm not sure if I hit all the points. I hope that I did. We continue to also, in our intake, we remind clients about physical distancing. We have visual cues or big circles on the ground to kind of indicate where people can stand or sit. But it's a constant thing, even with staff, to remind people about donning and doffing and washing their hands. And so that is part of our daily lives at this point.
Great. Thank you, Monica. I'm going to ask participants asking questions and panelists. Just a reminder, not everyone is always familiar with the acronyms, and I know we go down that rabbit hole, but just if you can say out what you're referring to so everybody can understand. We're not all familiar, so just in terms of participants on the call. I'm just going to go to some of the questions being posed in the Q&A. Can we hear about the rules that clients must follow? I'm assuming residents of 76 Church, so over to you again, Monica.
I'm getting all the questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't have it all memorized, but we do have a 3-page document that we review with clients. Some of them are specifically rules and some of them are reminders. So we've added pieces around COVID protocols and wearing masks and physical distancing as part of it. A lot of our rules are around things like no weapons. If you even have construction tools, we ask people to hand those into staff upon entering the building. We ask folks if they have alcohol to hand that in as well, and we would safe keep that for them. No violence. We're trying to be an anti-oppression shelter, so we discourage people from using discriminatory language. We have some rules around how long a bed can be saved for before we have to release it for somebody else. or if you want an overnight pass, that's something you need to work out with your counselor. All clients are required to meet with their case manager within 48 hours of coming into the shelter, because we really want to sit down with them and start pulling together what are their goals and working towards that housing plan. But there's a whole array of rules, and some of them are also when meals are served, or if you want a meal saved for you because you won't be there, what that process would look like, and how to access different spaces or programs in the building. And certainly, I think the good neighbor policy, we could probably post that on the website for folks to look at. But it's simply, just as inside the building, any kind of violence, mischief, disturbance in the community inside the building is not welcome. And we also try and get supports for people that we know are struggling. So perhaps in a situation, if there is somebody that we know would be defecating in non-washroom spaces, there might be some mental health pieces to that. So we would want to circle back with our community partners to see, is there a way to support this person, so that they actually, get the things that they need, instead of just kind of pushing them out.
Great. Thank you, Monica. I'm just going to go into another Q&A that's just been received. Can you please clarify what right of access use, so right of access use, locations in city bylaws means? So just trying to understand that terminology from slide 16. Loretta, I think this one's over to you.
Sure. So essentially what that's referring to is there's a bylaw that we basically refer to as the municipal shelter bylaw. And the shelter bylaw allows for shelters to be placed anywhere in the city of Toronto, with the exception being they cannot be placed in employment or industrial land use zoned areas. If any building or facility meets the shelter bylaw, that just means it doesn't require any type of approval or consultation in order to develop the building as a shelter, and it could be done as of right. City Council has also delegated authority to staff to select new locations for shelters, provided they meet this criteria. And this process helps us to sort of speed up the shelter development process, and it allows us to be consistent with a human rights-based approach to housing and services for our vulnerable residents.
Great. Thank you, Loretta. I'm just going to go to another question that was received earlier via Gmail. Monica, this is a little bit related to the rules, but slightly different and more dealing with the current COVID restrictions and regulations. So the question is, what education is provided to residents around the requirement to follow safety protocols when out and about in the neighborhood, specifically from continuing requirements to wear masks and maintain physical distance from other community residents? So recently an example is given that 3 residents were blocking the sidewalk toward Church and Adelaide intersection without masks. As this person walked to the street to provide space, they said, "Don't worry, we're vaccinated." So just wondering what kind of education residents get.
Okay. So I think first off, for me, I really don't want our residents to be blocking the sidewalk. So certainly we have an outdoor patio for folks up several floors up, and that's also a smoking area that people can go to without congregating in front of the building. We do have a rule about keeping the front of the building clear, and encourage folks to use the patio and just not block the sidewalk. But furthermore, it's constant education. We do have a steady group of clients who have been with us for a while, but then we also have a portion of the beds that are new clients kind of cycling through that have been referred in. And so this is a good reminder for us that we need to constantly have those conversations with folks. And yeah, people go and they Google things and they become their own experts on COVID, and they decide that, you know, they've got the vaccine. So, you know, it's carte blanche. And yeah, we have to do that with staff too. It's constant reminding ourselves. So I think I thank you for this comment. We've certainly had a lot of educational discussions with them and constant prompting throughout the day around wearing masks out in public and in the congregate areas of the shelter as well. And this is a good reminder for me to talk to staff about continuing that engagement ongoing.
Great, thank you, Monica. Zuna, I'm going to go to you for one of the live questions.
Thank you. I'm going to unmute Lara. Just one moment. Lara, go ahead, ask your question.
Hi, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, my question is a bit of a curveball, but I'm just wondering, like, beyond the immediate shelter and the project that you're working on, it just seems like affordable housing is a bigger picture issue. And I just want to know, like, for the downtown area, where I work and live, how does this fit into the city's priorities for affordable housing? And what are some of the other ways that hopefully we can alleviate some of the stresses and pressures that I think a lack of affordable housing are causing?
Great. Okay. Loretta, I think this one is in.
Yeah. So long term, we do want to prioritize housing as a solution to homelessness. And all of our shelters work from a housing first model, with the priority being to assist clients to secure permanent housing. In 2019, City Council did adopt our Housing TO 2020 to 2030 action plan, which provides a comprehensive blueprint to assist, over 340,000 people with a focus on creating permanent housing solutions. This would also include like 18,000 units that would be specific to supportive housing. And even our COVID-19 interim shelter recovery strategy that was put out last year identifies priority actions over the next 12 months that includes actions to invest in housing and supports to decrease the volume and duration and need for emergency shelter. So it's absolutely a priority of the city. And something we are working together with. Our Housing Secretariat division is working on this. There's a lot of initiatives with the Rapid Housing Initiative, funding from the province and the federal governments that have been provided to support this, so that we can start to move our clients from shelters into housing.
Great, thank you, Loretta. Councillor Wong-Tam, did you want to add something there?
Yes, I did. Thank you very much. And Loretta actually did a great job of summarizing the direction that the City of Toronto is going. And I recognize that the conversation is member, is a critical one, because I hear this quite often. How do we find ourselves?
Councillor Wong-Tam, we've lost your audio a little bit. Councillor Wong-Tam, perhaps if you take your video, we'll hear you. Yeah.
Okay, sure. I could do that. Thank you very much. Of course, I will do that. I'll turn off my video and see if that helps.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hopefully that's clear.
Yes, that's clear. We can hear you now.
Okay.
Nope, now we can't hear you. All right, Councillor Wong-Tam, I'm going to loop back to you. I'm just going to go to another question in the Q&A and see if you can sort out the volume issue. So we are not hearing you right now. Perhaps try reconnecting and we'll come back to you to complete that response. So another question that has just come in, what are your strategies for making sure clients transition to 76 Church Street safely and smoothly? What can neighbors do to help out? Monica, this sounds like a question for you.
And thank you for that. And that is a kind of question that really genuinely excites me. And I'm hoping whoever wrote this is potentially interested in joining the community liaison committee, or at least having some kind of channel into it. So the shelter is already open. So the beds are full, and but that is really, you know, a dream for us to be able to have community members, you know, I know it's hard during COVID, but to have community members support and encourage and bring forward creative ideas about how we can make the folks staying in the shelter feel like a part of the community. And, you know, I don't want to get into a whole kind of lecture, but I am somebody who has worked with people experiencing homelessness for over 20 years. And really, like, the number one thing that people say is they just want to be treated like everybody else. They don't want to be stigmatized. You know, nobody was born thinking that they would end up living at Seton House. That's not been the plan. And so I think having that connection to people who are in the community and that, you know, want to see people thrive and succeed, and have any ideas for positive engagement. I'm all in for listening to ideas. We can certainly also go back to clients and ask them if they want to brainstorm some things as well, or through the CLC, the Community Liaison Committee, that could be a real vehicle for us to, you know, get together and start thinking about how we can bridge the shelter to really be a part of the community. So I know I haven't given you a specific answer, but I'm sure the person who asked this probably has some great ideas as well that I would love to hear.
Great, thank you, Monica. I'm just going to check with Councillor Wong-Tam if you can.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
great, thank you. And hopefully this is clear. Sorry about that, folks. I guess this is the real world of virtual meetings. I just wanted to lean into what Loretta was saying earlier about the City of Toronto's direction of building housing and to ensure that we can actually move people out of homelessness and into a pathway of permanent housing. I think that it's important for the residents here to know that the city is very committed to doing this. Cities have traditionally not been in the
We've lost you again, Councillor Wong-Tam.
I'll take off my video. If this doesn't work, then I can definitely forego my speaking. So I'll just turn myself on video.
Yep.
Is that better?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Okay. So thank you. So I did want to say that there are some important numbers.
No, you're going out again. Sorry, Councillor Wong-Tam, we've lost you again.
No problems. Thank you.
Okay. It comes in and out, let's put it that way. I'm just going to go to more questions, and perhaps if you, we'll figure something out in the background. Another question has come through the Q&A box regarding the community safety team. First, is there one, and how many are on the team? What are the hours of service? What are the boundaries? What's the contact protocol? This person says they joined the meeting after the presentation, so this was covered. We don't need to repeat the response. I don't think that kind of detail was, so I'm going to hand that over to Monica.
Okay, thank you. So there actually is not a community safety team aligned with this shelter program. I know that there are a few community safety teams in the surrounding area focused on some of the larger hotel programs and respite centers. I believe that as part of the Downtown East strategy, there is a community safety team out and about in the boundaries of the Downtown East. And I have to say, for Seton House experience, we have never relied on security guards as a component of our programming. I'm hoping we can stay with that, but I'm certainly open to seeing what is available through the resources that are already out there in the community. I think that our shelter program is small. We've got a really great staff team, and we are just, building up some really great resources. So we've got lots more in store for the kind of programming we want to offer. So yeah, so currently there is no community safety team affiliated with the shelter program.
Okay, thanks, Monica. I just have a quick repeat question, trying to understand what VIA stands for, and I'm not sure what this is referencing.
I think
Monica?
that was probably from when I was talking, Violetta, and I was referencing the Downtown Young BIA, Business Improvement
Oh, BIA.
Association.
Okay, that's the Business Association. Got it. Thank you so much. Okay, I have another question that I'm going to go to. Loretta, I think this one may be for you. When Seton House returns in about 5 years, there's about 25% less capacity. So it would appear to me that 76 Church might become permanent. Can the city make assurances that 76 Church Street will not be permanent? Let's leave, yeah.
Yeah, so we're leasing the site. It's not a purchase facility, so the intent is not to make it a permanent site. You're correct that the totals don't necessarily match in terms of enough shelter spaces for, all 600 clients that people who were once at Seton House. But this also goes back to creating housing solutions. So as part of the GSR transition plan, there's units being created at Fife House, the Regeneration Community Service, that would allow to transition people into permanent housing solutions. And the larger GSR new site development will also include some long-term care units, transitional housing spaces, and I believe affordable housing spaces too. I don't know, Monica, if you have anything else you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, just to kind of emphasize, and I didn't speak to it earlier, that the George Street Revitalization Project helped fund a new program that Fife House opened up. I think it was probably about 2 years ago at this point. That's a 20-bed high support medical program that is run in conjunction with Inner City Family Health Team and Inner City Health Associates to have transitional housing for men who who are medically vulnerable, who are HIV positive, and who were living at Seton House. So we had 20 men move into that program, as well through Regeneration House with Habitat, an additional, I believe, 22 units of supportive housing that has been made into a managed alcohol program. So we have men from that program at Seton House who are in the process of moving to this new transitional housing program. So we have people that are moving into longer term housing programs that have been funded through this project out of the shelter system.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Monica. Zuna, I'm going to go over to you. I think there's a comment from Joe at City Family Health, if you can unmute.
Sure, of course. Thank you. I'm just going to look for that comment. And it says, I would like to thank all the panelists for a very informative presentation. I would like to thank all of the staff at 76 Church Street. Our staff from Inner City Family Health Team have been impressed by creating a welcoming and peaceful shelter. And it is a pleasure to provide nursing and social work services 1 day a week there. Well done.
That's lovely. Thank you. And Zuna, I'm going to keep it with you to one more question. I think it's 8:50, so I believe we have time for one more question. So let's take a live one as our final.
Sure. I'm just, sorry, one moment. Christine, I'm going to ask you to ask your question. Christine.
Thank you. I actually just want to reiterate the previous comments. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank you for this presentation. I also want to thank everybody who has made themselves available to answer questions. Certainly, not only with this particular shelter, but with 45 Esplanade, the counselor's office. Many people have put forth their names as, you know, contacts. Obviously, even just on this call, we had the police give us their contacts. There's a plethora of contacts, but I think what's happening in some instances is that it can be confusing. It often depends on if you're 311 is great, but if you need something a little bit more immediate, they may not be able to respond in time. It also then depends on whether something is on private property versus public property. It also then depends on if you're encountering a homeless person, which shelter they're associated with, because depending on that, you would have a different contact person. So it's a little difficult for people to navigate. And I understand that. I think this is something that we're all building together and trying to figure out. But with the high number of shelters in this particular neighborhood and community, is there thought to having a resource that would allow us to have one point of contact that then could you know, triage or point people to the right spot to go?
Yeah, it's a good question. Monica, can we try with you first? Yeah.
Well, actually, I know that my project director is listening in to this call tonight. And so certainly some kind of coordinated effort for such a large system is definitely something we would want to have. I think it would probably be difficult for a lot of reasons, but I will take this offline to the folks that I report to as something, and I'm sure this has come up before about how things could be more coordinated or what that could look like. I don't have that answer myself, so I don't want to just make something up on the fly, but thank you for your insights about this. I appreciate that.
Let me help you out, Monica. We have an excellent infographic that's just been produced that I have both electronic and hard copy versions of, which answers a lot of residents and businesses questions in terms of if this, who, then that. Like if this happens, who do I go to? And it's a nice pillar so you can see, oh, if it's okay, if it's that, that's who I call. If it's that, that's who I call. I'm more than willing. I have 10,000 hard copies sitting behind my desk right now, and I have a wonderful electronic version, and I'm more than willing to share it with anybody that would like it. So if you want to email me or track me down, there's only one of me at 51 Division. I'm not hard to get a hold of. My phone number, if you want to call me, 416-804-1095. I'll be happy to send it to anybody that wants it. And I'll send you a copy, Monica.
And
if I
Van Dyke. And me, please.
Okay.
And I'll share
All
that
right.
with our distribution list to the community. So if you could please include me when you share that with Monica. That
No
would be
problem.
I just wanted to also add, we do, I mean, as like a bare simple, like quick triaging type of option, we do have a generic email account, ssha.homeless@toronto.ca, where it's monitored daily, quite regularly, and your question could go to the appropriate individual that way too. Although the infographic is, it's probably easier to start right with the right person, but if you just wanted like a one-point option, that would be also available to you.
great. Thank you. It's 8:55 and I am going to close the Q&A portion of the meeting. Thank you everyone for participating, asking your great questions. We are sorry if you had a question we couldn't get to you. We had many coming in through the Q&A, emailed ahead of time and some hands up. So we tried to sift through them to balance off and make sure everyone could participate as much as possible in a meeting this size. If we could go to the next slide. Just a little bit about next steps, but first off, a thank you to all the panelists and our additional Kamalesh, and Sergeant Dick for participating and jumping in with additional information. Thank you to all the community participants who've joined the call. It is a late evening, so we appreciate your attention and the passion for your neighborhood. Some next steps and more information for follow-up. Summary of this meeting will be posted on the website. A recording of the event that is closed captioned will be posted to the city's YouTube channel. If you wish to receive these, please email us at clc.76church@gmail.com and we will add you to the mailing list and send out any updated information about this site. You can also visit the project website at www.toronto.ca/new shelter locations. And if you click through, you'll find a link for 76 Church Street. You can also stay in touch with Councillor Wong Tam at www.kristenwongtam.ca and her staff contact, Edward, edward.larusic@toronto.ca. I'd like to thank everyone once again and wish you a wonderful evening.